Hello, it's Maggie, the Cheshire Crafter here. Now spring is definitely on its way and I want to do some spring decor for my home. And the first thing I'm going to do is create some bunting using reclaimed fabric from a skirt and 4 men's shirts. This lime green skirt had 4 godettes, so I'm going to use those in particular. And it was also lined, so I'm going to use that lime green lining for the lighter greens, and I'm going to use a white lining. This was the lining from a dress for the colours that I don't want the lime green to show through. If we look closely at the fabrics, I've got one plain lemon, a lime with dots, that's what reminded me of Easter eggs, a green checked shirt, an orange gingham, and a purple, very bizarre but egg-shaped purple and green with beige. I'm going to show you how I cut the fabric from that, and I'm going to opt to do an odd number of bunting flags. The godettes are the triangular shapes that were cut and placed into the skirt to give it additional flair at the hem. And the triangular shape of these are ideal for bunting. I always recommend an odd number for bunting. It seems to look more pleasing to the eye. And I'm going to use 3 godettes, so this is going to be my centre one. So I'm going to have 1 on each outer edge. Therefore, this is going to be number 1, and I'm going to cut number 2, number 3, number 4, number 5, number 6 will be the central one, and then we go 7, 8, 9, 10 and finish on number 11. From the men's shirts, 3 were long sleeved and this green one was short sleeved. To cut my triangles, I'm going to use this acrylic ruler, and this I bought years ago. This includes the seam allowance, and I'm going to use a rotary cutter. Now, when I cut my long sleeve shirts, they look like this. I've cut the cuff off, I've cut round the arch from round the shoulder, and then I cut out the cuff fastener. And I ended up with a tag here. I'm hoping to get the best possible use of the fabric in the way that I cut with the least wastage. And on this piece, I'm hoping to do it in this area. I'm wanting to get the grain of the fabric, which is going up the length of a sleeve. I need my triangular on, and I'm hoping to get that piece and then turn my triangle over and get a piece over here. And to make sure I don't duplicate it, I'm going to use an erasable ink pen, and I'm going to mark it out first before I cut it. You can see when I use a ruler down the centre of the first triangle that my central line on the ruler, the 2 lines are parallel. That means I've got the grain in the right direction and parallel. And you'll also see on this ruler, she hasn't left it at a point. What she's done, she's squared that point off, and she's done the same to cut the corners off so you don't get dog ears with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Very good acrylic ruler, this one. I've had it for many years and I've used it many times. It's never failed me yet. Take the triangle away, you can see with a friction pen or a erasable pen where I've marked the fabrics, and I've used the least amount of fabric that I can. I don't cut the rest of the fabric away. I leave the rest of my fabric intact for whatever project I want to do at a later date. So let me cut those out now with a rotary cutter. Even with the steam iron, it was hard to iron out the creases in this shirt, so I've used a little bit of Mary Ellen's Best Press, and that's helped. Now you'll see that I've lined this up, going down the grain of the fabric again. The last thing I want is these eggs, which are going to really be like an illusion. I don't want them on the banners at an angle. So I'm going to take the centre point of the ruler straight up the grain, and to do that I'm going to go between those eggs and then cut them. Might be harder to mark this fabric with the erasable ink pen, but I'll give that a go too. I've lined up the central line, and like the base here, I'm going to make sure that it's cut evenly across the same number of eggs and mark that. On this gingham shirt, you can see it's not as wide across. This was probably a medium, more likely a small. And I can't get two of those triangles from this bottom section, so I'm going to have to go up. Let me show you on this one how I've managed to cut it. For the first cut, I've managed to get the triangle in the best place where I can get the widest part along across the horizontal of the gingham, and I need to make sure that's perfectly straight. And then I've taken the middle point 8 up using the vertical line. As you can see, I've not cut in the middle of that line, I've cut just on the side of it. Just on the side of it in both places. Let's see where I can find to cut the second piece. Second piece, I've got two choices. I could either go up to here and cut more in the midline of the fabric, or alternatively, instead I've decided to go to the edge of the fabric, so I leave a larger piece of fabric for later use. And I'm using the same principle here of going down that. I haven't lined this up very well, have I? Might need to go up one of that, using that number 8 on that diagonal line, and when I put the phone down I'll make sure it's straight across. With the short sleeve, I'm able to use the same principle of using a straight horizontal and a straight vertical, and I'm also then going to be able to flip my ruler, which gives me the least waste from this small sleeve. I'm not going to use right down into these crevices because I can actually still see the needle holes. I'll cut that strip off, and then I've got a bit of scrappy ribbon. This is cotton linen, and you can see the fibres on here, and you can see which is horizontal and which are vertical lines. So I've lined the horizontal up with my cutting mat, and then I've placed my cutting ruler along the edge there, which will give me a good cut. I'm only going to get one from each godet, but then I've got a long strip which will be spare. So after cutting 11 flags, I said 13 before and I should have said 11. So after cutting 11 flags, I've got most of the sleeves of those shirts. I've got 3 long strips from the godets. I've cut some of the scrap into strip ribbons for a shabby chic project I'm going to do, and this is my waist. It's not bad, is it? When placing the fabrics together, I'm making sure I've not got 2 checks next to two spots together. So I've put a spot, a tartan, a plain, a spot and a tartan, and then we'll come back to another spot. I don't want this green lining to show through on the orange, so I'm just going to use it on the yellow spot and the plain yellow, and on the others I'm going to use white. So I've worked out my pattern, and that means I'm going to cut 5 lime and 6 white. Exactly the same as before, but I can place them next to each other. Lining fabric is such thin cotton that you can see through it. By placing next to each other, I mean I'm hoping to get 1, 2, 3 from this narrow piece of skirt, and then I'm going to use another gore of skirt to get that, and that will leave me the wider pieces of skirt left to use later, just like that. and 2 pieces from the next gore of skirt. So this is the white fabric, and I've used the lining from a Broidery and Glay dress. This is the back, and I know that this is the back because I can still see the holes and the dart mark. It hasn't ironed out completely, and obviously it was a V shape. I've starched both the front and the back, and I'm going to ask you, with both pieces of fabric, I need to cut 6 flags. Where do you think you would have cut? And then I'll tell you what decisions I made and why I made them. Let me show you the front. This is the front of the dress, and I've given you a clue because I've only starched down to here. So it's very evident on this that I'm going to start to place my triangle up into those shapes and make best use of those. So I've got 2 triangles there on both the front and the back. Now the things I want to avoid here are, can you see where I've taken the bust apart? So that really encroaches quite a long way in at the front, and I don't want to use that piece. So from the front, I'm going to use the 2 pieces up into the triangles at the top, and then I'm going to take the rest from the back. Let me show you with a photograph where I've decided to make those cuts. You can see where I've drawn my triangles. I've avoided the seam line. I don't want to sew back into those seam lines on either triangle. So I've done that both sides, and that's because once you've got a seam line there, you've got a weakened seam line, and I want a stronger seam as I can get on this very flimsy fabric. So on the back, I've made the same decisions to cut the triangles into the shoulder pieces, and then I've gone outside as far as I can, and I've turned the triangle upside down so I can get that shape while avoiding these darts on either side. So I'm opting to use the outside of the fabric first, and that leaves me a larger space in the middle. I'll show you what both of the shapes of these linings look like once I've cut these triangles out. There are my triangles cut. There's a few pieces of thin ribbon strips. This is so thin, it's not quilting cotton. I wouldn't even keep the pieces for crumb quilting, but it'll do for a shabby chic project I have in mind. And there's my waist. And then if I show you the front and the back of the dress, you'll see I've preserved the biggest piece I can use for future projects. That's the shape of the bag. I've got a huge square here and a rectangle at the top. Probably I can get a 10-inch square out of that top. And from the dress, I've tucked under where the darts are, because I don't think I'll be able to use that, but it gives me a longer piece here. And then I've got a large square piece. So I've preserved the maximum amount and the most reasonable shape I'm likely to use in the future from an irregular shape. So there are my triangles cut out, 11 fronts and linings, white lining and green lining. All I'm going to do to sew them together is sew right sides together, and then I'm going to sew them onto a long white bias binding. If I've got enough on that roll, if I haven't, I might use something different. But I hope in this video you've learned something about how to cut into reclaimed cotton, and this is a recycling project. So if you've enjoyed this video and you've learned something, please like, don't forget to subscribe because it's free. So this is Maggie, the Cheshire Crafter, saying come back and see me for when I sew this, won't you? Bye.